What up, gamers? Well, a little funny story about that word, actually. I was talking with other teachers, and we were thinking, what are gender neutral ways to greet the students? And I suggested gamers, of course, and I hope other teachers say "What up, gamers" when they greet students as well. Anyway, welcome, gamers. Today we're going to talk about the Ottoman Empire. So this is going to be chapter. So this is going to be chapter 4 of Unit 3, and we're going to talk about the Ottoman Empire, as I just said. So, bell work on the screen. What luxury goods are being traded around the world at this time that we've been talking about? Oh my God, there we go. So yes, we are going to talk about the Ottoman Empire, and we are going to begin looking at a series of civilizations called Gunpowder Empires. And these gunpowder empires describe, you can see Harold's tale in the screen a little bit. Gunpowder empires, as we're going to see in a second, they describe mostly Islamic civilizations that, well, you guessed it, used gunpowder to expand rapidly. So yes, today we're going to focus on this theme of how do land-based empires develop and expand. And today our example is the Ottoman Empire. Next chapter, we're going to look at the Mughals and the Safavids. So I mentioned this term at the beginning. I said gunpowder empires. And what is a gunpowder empire? Well, generally, it describes an Islamic society that existed between 1450 and 1750 that had similar economic and military structures, political and military structures. Harold is trying to eat me right now. This is how he shows love. Don't worry, he loves me. So let's look at kind of the three big empires that we're going to talk about in very broad terms. So today we're going to look at the Ottomans, and then in next presentation, we'll look at the Safavid and Mughal empires. All of these places existed relatively at the same time. The Safavids are the first to go, then the Mughals, then the Ottomans. So let's look at the Ottoman Empire a little bit more. But before we do that, we're going to look at some comparisons actually between these gunpowder empires. And worlds, remember, is kind of a very general, broad theme sort of class. So whenever we're talking about comparisons, that is something to pay attention to. So yes, we are going to look at these three empires right here. The Ottoman Empire, which is primarily Sunni Islam, the Safavids, which are mostly Shia Muslims, and the Mughals, which is largely Sunni-based empire. So there are some similarities between these different gunpowder empires. For one thing, all of these empires, well, you guessed it, they used gunpowder. So yes, they did use military technology like gunpowder. That's probably the primary reason why they expanded and were able to conquer vast inland territory, as with the case with all of these empires. All of these empires had originally kind of Central Asian or Turkish nomadic origins. The Ottomans, we'll look at that today, they definitely did, but also the Safavids and Mughals. The Mughal Empire actually will claim to be the descendants of the Timurids and Genghis Khan, as we'll talk about later. All of these places are mostly Muslim powers in the sense that their rulers are Muslim. There is a difference, however, in what type of Islam they practice. So, Sunni for the Ottomans and Mughals, Shia for the Safavids. All of these places kind of contributed greatly to culture and to artistic developments in a time period we call the Islamic Renaissance. All of these places are going to also be examples of absolute monarchies. So what we talked about in our last chapter with Louis Sexy Legs the 14th. Those are all the similarities I can think of anyway, or at least are relevant for this class. But there are some key differences. These places, again, are going to be in different spots, but they're especially different in how in their populations, in terms of the religious demographics of their societies. All of these places have Muslim rulers, but not necessarily all of their subjects are Muslims. In the Mughal Empire, as we're going to see, the big characteristic of them is that the ruling class are Muslims, but everyone else is primarily Hindu. So there is kind of a big difference between a Muslim ruling class and a Hindu everybody else. That's not to say Hindus weren't in the upper class. We'll talk about the Mughal Empire later, but for our purposes, mostly non-Muslims in the Mughal Empire. The Safavids, it's almost universally just Muslims. In fact, we mostly see conformity through Shia Islam. And we'll talk about how that leads to a lot of challenges with the Ottomans, because the Ottomans, their sultans are mostly Sunni. And yet, there is significant population of Jews and Christians as well in the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is in the region of Palestine, or, well, Israel and Palestine, and also in the Balkans, which is a largely Orthodox Christian territory. So there is a mixture of Jews, Christians, and Muslims in the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottomans, as we're going to see today, they largely practiced religious tolerance, except when they didn't towards the end of their existence, but we'll talk about that in Unit 7. So you should be able to define what a gunpowder empire is, and you should also be able to note similarities and differences between these three major empires. And of course, we will explore them in more detail in just a second. Hello, Harold, you're back. So we're going to pay attention now to the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire, as we're going to see in this class, lasts for a really long time, until 1922. Hypothetically, there are still people who are alive today that were alive when the Ottoman Empire existed, although very few people, admittedly. But yes, we are going to largely focus on the rise of the Ottoman Empire in this presentation. We'll look at the fall of the Ottomans when we talk about World War I. All right, so what's the big deal with the Ottoman Empire? In the words of Jerry Seinfeld, what's the deal with the Ottoman Empire? He never said that, but that's, never mind. All right. So we talked about the Ottomans in passing when we talked about kind of the legacy of the Mongol Empire. Remember kind of the Mongols, they invaded the Middle East. They formed what was known as the Ilkhanate or the Ilkhanate, which was essentially the Mongol rule in the former Abbasid Caliphate. But when the Mongols invaded the Middle East, they also brought with them other nomadic groups, other Central Asian, Turkish groups. And some of these Turkish groups, well, they're going to settle down in a region of West Asia, so a region of the Middle East known as Anatolia, mostly the modern-day country of Turkey. It's also sometimes called Asia Minor, so if you see that term, it just means Turkey, basically. But when we have these Central Asian nomads, these Turkish people moving to Anatolia, we eventually do see that they will kind of form a political dynasty under the leadership of a Turkish man named Osman. Osman Bey. Bey is a Turkish noble title. So Osman is going to break away from the Ilkhanate. He's also going to seize land from the Byzantine Empire, and he's going to form a powerful ruling dynasty known as the House of Osman, named after himself. And with that, we are going to see the creation of the Ottoman Empire. So initially kind of a small principality in Anatolia that, as we're going to look at today, will expand to take over much of the Eastern Mediterranean and parts of North Africa and the Middle East as well. But kind of the Ottoman Empire, it forms about 1299 or 300, depending on what historian you are. But they're going to reach kind of their entryway into global politics, you could say, become a major regional power after their invasion of Constantinople and finally destroying the stupid Byzantines. Maybe I'm too hard on the Byzantines. I just really like the Ottoman Empire. But with the invasion of Constantinople, the Ottomans are going to gain a very luxurious capital that they are going to be centered in. And Constantinople is a great spot because it is not only kind of having this legacy of Rome, but it also is a key trading center. It's the traditional end of the Silk Road, for example. It's also in this key area known as the Bosphorus Strait, which essentially is a major trade point within the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. And the Ottoman Empire, mostly because of its wise leadership, I guess you could say, because of its kind of well-organized government structure, in addition to its key spot on trade networks, is going to be a major world power. And as such, it's going to last for quite some time. It will eventually collapse by 1922, with the First World War being the major kind of impetus for this breakup, as we'll talk about much more later on. But let's see kind of how the Ottoman Empire will expand and become a very formidable foe, you could say, to Western Europe. Because as you can see in this map right here, the greatest extent of the Ottoman Empire is actually going to go well into Central Europe, into German-speaking Austrian territory. So yes, we will see that the Ottoman Empire is a vast empire stretching from North Africa all the way to East Africa at their greatest height, but also taking up a large portion of European territory in the East as well. So how are the Ottomans going to be so successful? Well, this is actually kind of an AP-ish what you should know about the Ottomans. Well, largely the Ottomans are going to be very aggressive in their expansion thanks to military tactics, the use of horseback warfare. That's kind of the legacy of the Mongols, I guess, with the Ottomans. But we call the Ottomans a gunpowder empire because they do use gunpowder. We mostly are going to see that this expansion is able to happen because of gunpowder technology, because of muskets and cannons. And I guess those are all the things I can think of that use gunpowder. And that's all of them, I guess. So we do see this use of horseback warfare, but more importantly for us in this time period, the use of gunpowder. This is going to allow for this aggressive expansion, and especially kind of the Ottomans are using the best gunpowder technology because they're at the end of this Silk Road trade point. They're getting all this gunpowder from China. They're getting the improvements made in the Middle East. So the use of gunpowder technology is going to be the primary way that the Ottomans are so successful in taking over vast amounts of territory. They use cannons, for example, to destroy the walls of Constantinople and invade that city in 1453. If there's one date, I guess, to remember in world history at this point, it's 1453, because that's when the Ottomans invade Constantinople, make it Istanbul. Although technically it was still called Constantinople, it's just, never mind, all right. So yes, the use of gunpowder is the primary reason, again, why the Ottomans will be so successful in taking over vast amounts of territory, taking away territory from the Byzantine Empire and the Ilkhanate, or the Ilkhanate. I've been mispronouncing it. So yes, they are going to kind of seize this significant Eastern European territory by the 1500s, but they're also going to take the two holiest cities, actually I should say the three holiest cities in Islam, Jerusalem, Mecca, and Medina. And then that's kind of descending order of importance. So we are going to see that the Ottomans are going to become a major Islamic power after controlling these key cities that are central to the Islamic faith. Muhammad was born in Mecca, he taught in Mecca, he received his revelations near Mecca. Medina is what housed him way back when we talked about it in Unit 1. And then Jerusalem's where he rode a horse up to heaven, basically. So yes, these are very important cities, and it is going to make the Ottoman Empire a leading center of the Islamic world since they control these three big cities. And we are going to see that the Ottomans are an aggressive power that are going to, and I'm not condemning, or at this point, I'm not condemning them, but we do see that they are a power that's able to rival Western Europe and the Persian empires that we're going to talk about, mostly with the Safavids. So a big thing to also remember from all of this is that the Middle East, because of this aggressive expansion by not just the Ottomans, but the Safavids as well, is going to be a territory of a lot of intense conflict. And this conflict is not going to be very good for trade. So the conflict between the Safavids and the Ottomans, I should say, it is going to actually lead to a decline in overland trade. Overseas trade is going pretty strong. No one controls the ocean just yet. But overland trade is starting to decline thanks to these inter-regional wars between the Ottomans, for example, and the Safavids, and also the Europeans. The most important figure to kind of associate with Ottoman expansion and kind of when we see the peak of the Ottoman Empire is going to be under the reign of this man in the very elaborate turban, very elaborate onion hat, as some people might say, Suleiman the Magnificent. And yes, Suleiman the Magnificent, or Suleiman the Lawgiver, as he's referred to in Turkish history, is going to be a very important sultan who's going to lead this rapid expansion, especially into North Africa and into Southeastern Europe. So we are going to see that parts of Eastern Europe, the Balkans, this is going to become part of the Ottoman Empire, a largely Orthodox Christian region going to be a part of the Ottoman Empire, the Sunni Muslim Empire. We see expansion into North Africa. They will subdue a region of North Africa called the Barbary Coast and make them their vassals. Fans of Thomas Jefferson might have heard of them before. We also have Eastern European, but Eastern Mediterranean territory as well with Aleppo. Jeff, you're so sweet. I love you so much. All right. You can't see him because my screen is blurred, but he's being very cute right now. Let me unblur my background. He's being a sun cat right now, but you can see him right there. Yeah. All right. So let's keep going with the Ottoman Empire. So another important thing that Suleiman is going to do, I like saying his name too, Suleiman. It's the actually Turkish translation of Solomon. So Solomon the Magnificent. Anyway, so we are going to see that Suleiman is not only going to add significant territory to the Ottoman Empire, but he's also going to establish the Ottoman Empire and legitimize the Ottoman Empire as a Sunni caliphate. And remember, a caliphate is a society where there is a very big importance and leadership role for the successor of Muhammad. And this successor of Muhammad, again, not directly related to Muhammad, but he is kind of the picked out, you could say, by the religious leaders of the Ottoman Empire, the ulama. So yes, the Ottoman Empire is going to be established as a caliphate under Suleiman. We are going to see that this is kind of to raise the not popularity, but to raise the status of the Ottoman Empire in the broader Muslim world. So the Ottomans going to be kind of a leading figure in the Muslim world in this period between 1450 and 1750. And he's also going to centralize the Ottoman state, primarily to help expand the Ottoman Empire. He is going to establish a very elaborate bureaucracy. He is going to establish a system we'll talk about in a second called the Dershame, and we'll talk about what that means more in just a second. And he is going to centralize his rule, much like we saw with the absolute monarchs of Europe. He is going to be called a sultan. And the sultan in this context essentially is a Muslim king, basically. So it's not only the fact that he's the secular leader, the sultan, but he's also the religious figurehead in a way. He is the caliph. Eventually, kind of later on in Ottoman history, the sultan and the caliph become two separate positions. But we are going to see that the kind of claim to succeeding Muhammad is going to come from these Ottomans. That's going to lead to conflict, as we'll see in a second, with the Shia Safavids. Remember, Shia and Sunni, the primary kind of early religious difference is a difference over who is the successor of Muhammad. Another thing that Suleiman's going to do to centralize power is he's going to stop a practice in Ottoman history where the kind of all the sons of a sultan, that they basically go to war with each other, whoever is going to succeed the sultan. So he's going to say that, no, it's the guy I choose. It's not necessarily the oldest son, but it's the one I think is most capable of leading. It's also going to establish a legal system in the Ottoman Empire, one that does respect religious tolerance and also centralizes power, and it makes the tax system more efficient. And that's why he's also called Suleiman the Lawgiver. And yes, this is going to kind of be the height of the Ottoman Empire in the 1580s when Suleiman, after the reign of Suleiman, I should say, is going to include parts of Eastern Europe, as far as Hungary, even parts of Austria, and all the way down here to the Persian Gulf, to modern-day Kuwait, if you recognize the... Never mind. All right. So let's pay attention to a bit about the Ottoman military because it is unique, but it is an example of a professionalized army. So, an army that is loyal essentially to the Sultan, to the absolute monarch of the Ottoman Empire. Nobles play a role in the kind of Ottoman military, but again, not this kind of feudalistic model that we saw during the Middle Ages in Europe, or in a very decentralized model like we saw with the Mongols. So, one of the aspects of the Ottoman military that is important to note, and something that I alluded to earlier, is the kind of military core that makes up the Ottoman military, the Janissaries. And the Janissaries are going to be firearm infantry units. They are going to be initially kind of slaves, as we'll talk about in just a second, but they are going to be kind of the primary organization that will assist the Ottomans in expanding across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. So the Janissaries, they're essentially the firearm infantry, the gunpowder using infantry of the Ottoman Empire. But I say right here that they are initially of slave origin. And let me clarify what I mean by that. Because the Janissaries are primarily going to be made up of enslaved Christian men who are taken as little boys, or well, not little boys, but are taken as young men. They are going to be kind of taken through this process known as the Dev Sherme. And essentially, it is a form of tribute. It is a tax collection that's based on tribute. And in this case, the tribute is young Christian boys, especially from the Balkans, from southeastern Europe. So these are initially Christians, These are initially Christians who are taken as a kind of form of tribute to comprise the Ottoman military. So initially, they are going to be Christian boys taken at a young age. They're going to be educated in Turkish. They're going to convert to Islam. And guess who they are going to be solely loyal to? Well, it's not their families back home in the Balkans, but it is going to be the Ottoman Sultan. So we do kind of see this rise of a professionalized army. They are going to be a very formidable fighting force. And oftentimes, this is seen as kind of a great honor in these Christian villages because this is a sign of social advancement. Literally, Christian boys in the Balkans, what are they going to be? They're going to be peasants and turnip farmers. But when they're kind of included into the Ottoman military, they have a lot of political say, actually. They have a lot of political and social mobility. They can marry into the highest kind of elites of Ottoman society. They can convert to Islam, and they can marry into Ottoman royalty, actually. So we do see that the kind of Janissaries, while we might say, oh, kidnapping is wrong, we are going to see that it is an opportunity for social advancement, especially for young Christians in a mostly Muslim society. However, it is important to note that about the 1700s, the Janissaries are going to kind of be a force in the Ottoman Empire that's very resistant to change. They are a very conservative, traditional force in the Ottoman Empire. They are an institution that doesn't want to give up power to the Sultan, even though they're supposed to be loyal to the Sultan. And this is a big deal, actually, because as we'll talk about towards the end of today, by the 1700s, the cracks in the Ottoman Empire are starting to show. We do see a very slow period of decline. And kind of, even though there are efforts to try and modernize the empire, guess who's going to be resistant to that? It's this very conservative force of the Janissaries. They don't want the Ottomans to westernize their country, as we'll talk about more later. They are a force that's very resistant to change. The other important aspect of the Ottoman military is the navy. And the navy of the Ottomans is going to be kind of another way they secure influence through dominating trade, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean and parts of the Indian Ocean. And yet we are going to see that this Ottoman naval superiority is going to be challenged thanks to the rise of European maritime empires, namely the Portuguese. The Portuguese, they're going to rise in influence, as we'll talk about more in Unit 4. They're going to kind of be the dominant power in the Indian Ocean, taking that away from Muslim groups. Eventually, the Portuguese will be replaced by the Dutch and then later on the English. But we also see that the Ottomans will have a significant blow to their European influence, to their Mediterranean influence after the Battle of Lepanto in 1571. And this is a naval battle between the Spanish and the Ottomans. The Spanish hate the Ottomans. The Spanish, remember, super Catholic, super anti-Muslim. They are going to kind of challenge the Ottomans in their control of the Mediterranean. Guess what Spain does? Spain wins at this battle right here. So one of the kind of explanations, why is the Ottoman Empire suddenly losing their touch in things like these naval battles? Well, it could be the fact that the Ottomans were resistant to modernization, adapting to new gunpowder technologies that the Europeans were increasingly adopting because of things like this scientific revolution. So that's one kind of historical interpretation. I'll make the argument it's mostly because of the fact that the Ottomans just expanded way too much, but we'll talk about that later. And just to kind of use that word right there, the Ottomans primarily used this kind of boat called a galley, which has oars and sails, and yeah, it looks like that. Okay. So where is the Ottoman Empire expanding to? Who are the Janissaries? How are they selected and how are they used? You should be able to identify these things. All right, let's keep going. Let's talk about Ottoman governments. So the Ottoman Empire is going to kind of largely embody these trends that we saw in Western Europe with the absolute monarchs. We are going to see that the Ottoman sultans, they basically are going to be very similar to absolute monarchs. So you should be able to compare kind of general characteristics of absolutism to the Ottomans. We see that in a variety of different ways. There's a complex bureaucracy, a complex government structure to administer and run the empire. There's a very systematic way to tax the Ottoman Empire that exists. There's the use of a professionalized army, and we saw that with the Janissaries. But something that is different, so to say, with, say, France or Spain, these other absolutist monarchies, is that the Ottomans are going to be religiously tolerant, especially towards Jews and Christians. Jews and Christians are allowed to freely practice. We see this mosaic right here. This is an Ottoman Sultan, I believe Mehmed II, and he is granting kind of religious freedom to the Patriarch of Constantinople, to the leader of the Orthodox community in Constantinople. The only thing that Christians and Jews have to do if they want to live in the Ottoman Empire is pay a very small tax called the jizya tax. So that we do kind of see a continuity with how Islamic empires largely practice religious tolerance, and we also see kind of the continued use of the jizya tax, or a tax placed on non-Muslims in exchange for religious tolerance. The only kind of group that's not really accepted in the Ottoman Empire are going to be Shia Muslims, and we'll talk about that more with the Safavid Empire. So yes, kind of Shia Muslims, they are Muslims, so that's fine, but they're the wrong type of Muslim. And it's mostly because, guess what? Who do they believe is the successor to Muhammad? Well, some other guy, some other figure. I don't think there is a Shia caliph position at this point. I think that's largely gone at this point. But we do kind of see that there is this religious discrimination, you could say, against Shia Muslims. However, it is important to understand that even though kind of we initially see this very efficient bureaucracy, very efficient tax collecting system, there are going to be a lot of strains on the bureaucracy as the Ottoman Empire expands, especially into Europe and into North Africa. So kind of as the Ottoman Empire expands, it becomes harder to govern that empire. That's kind of similar to the Romans. And it kind of gives an argument that the Ottomans were actually the continuation of the Roman Empire. So did the Roman Empire even last or end? And that's actually interesting because the Ottomans do see themselves as a continuation of a lot of different empires. The Romans, Alexander the Great, the Persians as well. But that's beyond the scope of this class. All right, so what about culture? Well, the center of the Ottoman Empire in terms of culture is going to be the, capital city of Constantinople. It's one of the biggest and most impressive cities of the Eastern Mediterranean. It really is kind of a third or a second Rome, so to say. So it is going to be a center of culture, and it is going to be where, in keeping with that idea of the Ottomans being an absolute monarchy, it's where they're going to kind of show off their power, their Ottoman sultans. Look at how rich and powerful we are. We built this very elaborate mosque, this very elaborate palace. So we do see that kind of Constantinople will be used by Ottoman sultans to glorify their rule. So we do see the building of elaborate mosques and palaces. Some examples include converting the Hagia Sophia church into a mosque. Yay, it's a mosque now. Woohoo. Well, I don't know if that's, I don't want to make like a statement on like what exactly, Hagia Sophia should be. It can be whatever it wants. Anyway, so Hagia Sophia, that's a kind of, it will be converted to a mosque. We see the creation of the Blue Mosque, and its name is pretty self-explanatory. But we'll also see the kind of development of the Grand Bazaar. The Grand Bazaar is this huge marketplace that I'll show a picture of in just a second. And we do kind of see that every sultan, to a degree, they will try and glorify their rule through building up elaborate palaces or mosques or gardens in the city of Constantinople. All right. In terms of culture, what else do we see with the Ottomans? Well, we do see kind of that the Ottoman sultans will not only fund these architectural developments, but also artistic and literary ones. We see that kind of the language of high culture in the Ottoman Empire is not Turkish, actually, it's Persian and Arabic. But we also do see that Turkish is used mostly in the government. And in terms of the economy of the Ottoman Empire, well, it's mostly going to be based on trade, at least initially. We mostly see that the Ottomans, they do have initially kind of an influence in the Indian Ocean and in the Eastern Mediterranean, but also they're kind of holding on to the last remnants of overland trade. And yet, Europeans don't want to have to go through the Ottoman Empire. The reason why this map is green, these are allied states of the Ottomans. Most of Europe hates the Ottomans, except the French. And that's mostly because the French, well, they don't care about kind of differences in religion as long as you can be an ally against their least favorite group of people, the Habsburgs, the German-speaking dynasty right next door to them. So we do see that there is, again, that's kind of related to what we talked about with the Reformation, that states are aligning with other states, not because of similar religion, but because of shared political enemies. Religion isn't determining foreign policy. There's an example with the Ottomans and the French. Also, the French allied with the Mongols, but I didn't talk about that. It's really weird. Anyway, you don't need to know this. Anyway, trade. Back to trade. Yes, the Ottomans are going to be kind of using their position as a key area between Europe, Asia, Europe, Asia, and Africa to kind of have an economy based on trade. And yet, a few things are going to kind of hurt the Ottomans, and that's going to be mostly because, for one thing, all of these wars of expansion are going to disrupt overland trade, especially between the Safavids and the Ottomans. But we also see that the Europeans are sick and tired of having to go through the Ottoman Empire if they want to kind of trade with the East Asian countries, if they want to trade with China. So to kind of get around that, as we're going to talk about in Unit 4, European powers are going to, guess what, either go around Africa overseas or go west because they think they can get straight to East Asia if they go west. Little did they realize there's a whole new set of continents there, as we'll talk about more in Unit 4. Burnt my phone, by the way. So this is what the Blue Mosque looks like, and it's not just how the image is it was taken, but it is going to be heavily used. What's the blue mineral called? The lapis lazuli. It's been a while since I've played Minecraft. They use that kind of blue mineral. They crave that blue mineral to make this mosque right here. A lot of gold, lots of blue dye, lots of blue minerals being used. This is a palace that was built under Suleiman, and it's a terrible quality image. I didn't take this. I do want to go to Istanbul one day. That's number one really on my international travel list. And that's a picture of the bazaar actually in the 1920s, so about the end of the Ottoman Empire. No, never mind. All right. So this is what Ottoman society looks like in terms of class, mostly going to be based on this aristocracy, this military aristocracy, or a warrior aristocracy, as it's sometimes called. So it's a class-based system where military leaders are kind of at the top, and then there's everybody else below them. In terms of gender, there are some interesting things actually about the Ottoman Empire to discuss. And of course, a big kind of continuity in world history is that for the most part, women don't have a kind of prominent position in many social systems, in many kind of European, even Asian and European and Asian kind of societies. Women don't have the best spot. And yet we do kind of see some social and political influence for elite women, especially in the Sultan's harem. So the harem, or the royal harem more accurately, it essentially is a collection of all the different concubines, all the different potential sexual partners of the Ottoman sultans. And the Ottoman sultans actually don't marry because they don't want all of this kind of questioning of, oh, my son, or they don't want all this conflict between sons all the time because sons could potentially say, oh, I was born first, I deserve to rule. No, I was born first, I deserve to rule. Well, how can you like question who was born first? Anyway, so we do kind of see that the royal harem will be a body basically that is going to mostly comprise of the sultan's concubines and his kind of immediate family. That's what the harem generally describes. It's off limit to outsiders, to non-royal family members, other than eunuchs, other than people that it's mostly men that don't that are castrated. Anyway, so the harem is kind of a body that exists in the Ottoman Empire. And you could say, yes, that is obviously objectifying women into just being sexual partners. But women in the royal harem actually kind of do have the closest access to the Ottoman Sultan. They can act as advisors, actually. And actually, the most prominent woman is going to be the Ottoman's mother. And after she's dead, the Ottoman's Sultan's wives. And these wives can actually form a kind of political basis. They can be kind of advisors to the Sultan. And a prominent example of that is actually this lady right here, Haram Sultana, or Roxolana. She was initially a Christian princess, I think from Poland, so Polish representation. But anyway, so we are going to see Roxolana. She was a Christian princess. She was kidnapped in a war. Eventually, she agrees to marry Suleiman the Magnificent, actually. And she is going to kind of be a very close advisor to Suleiman. Suleiman, for the most part, does listen to her and kind of takes her advice for not for granted, the opposite of that. He considers it actually. So we do kind of see that Ottoman women in the royal sultan, they can have a political say as advisors. They can also kind of convince the Ottoman sultans, hey, you love me, right? So you should make my son your successor. So a bit of a toxic relationship. I'm just kidding. Yeah, there is kind of this ability to convince the sultan to pick out their sons to be the successor, and that leads to a lot of political influence because if your little boy is the sultan, you can kind of say, hey son, I'm your mom, you should listen to what I have to say. So how do kind of Ottoman sultans culturally justify or legitimize or support their rule? Building palaces and whatnot. And how is the Ottoman Empire an example of an absolutist state? All right, so let's finally kind of end by looking at some of the cracks that are starting to form in the Ottoman Empire. We're going to look at the kind of causes of the slow and steady decline of the Ottoman Empire. I'll have to fix this before class. But what are some factors of decline? Well, it is important to realize that the Ottoman Empire is going to be around for quite some time, until the 1900s. But some cracks are starting to show by the 1650s. So let's look at some of those causes of decline. And there are 4 that are relevant to our class. For one thing, the Ottoman Empire is just too dang big. I mean, it stretches from the shores of Tripoli all the way to the Persian Gulf. So a kind of big, or not a kind of big, but a pretty big empire, at least kind of almost rivaling the size of Rome way back in Unit 0. But we do see that the empire is going to expand. And when you expand really rapidly, it's kind of difficult to administer that empire, especially as you get further and further away from the imperial core, the metropole, to use a world history term. So we do see that kind of as people are expanding further and further away from Constantinople, from Istanbul, we do see that independence movements will start to pop up, especially in areas that are not Muslim, in Christian areas. So we will see eventually kind of the rise of independent Christian kingdoms in the Balkans, but we also see different revolts. Shia Muslims will lead revolts in the areas closer to Persia, to Iran. We also see revolts of the Janissaries, and I'll talk about that more in just a second. We also see that generally Ottoman sultans are going to kind of be less effective the further and further on the empire grows. We do see a lot of corruption in the Ottoman Empire with the sultans. The sultans prefer to kind of spend time with the harem rather than ruling. And for that reason, we kind of do see the position of the caliph. That's going to be a separate position eventually by the 1800s, I believe. There's also just too dang high of taxes, and peasants don't like taxes, especially if they're the people who pay them, and nobles are actually excused from paying taxes. So we do see a lot of peasant revolts. That's kind of something we generally see around the world in this period between 1450 and 1750. A lot of peasant revolts against taxation systems. That's true in Europe. That's definitely true in the Ottoman Empire as well. But there's also going to be some economic problems as well in the Ottoman Empire, and it's mostly going to be for a few reasons. For one thing, after 1500, there's going to be kind of an international global crisis because Europe is just discovering too much silver, especially Spain. Spain is basically going to flood the market with silver because a lot of these Middle Eastern and East Asian societies, they don't want European goods. I mean, what does Europe have to offer? Like wool? Who uses wool? Wool is hot in the desert. Wool is hot in a jungle. Who cares about wool? Wool is stupid. So we do kind of see that the only thing kind of Middle Eastern and East Asian countries want is silver. And yet they're going to get too much silver. It's going to actually decline the value of silver. That's going to lead to a lot of problems, not just in the Ottoman Empire, but in the Safavid and Mughal and Chinese empires as well. With the Qing dynasty. We'll talk about them later. We also see that kind of the Ottoman Empire is going to lose its status as a major overland trade empire because Europe is going to largely ignore going through the Ottoman Empire in favor of overseas trade routes. We also see that after 1750, Europe is going to become the predominant manufacturer. And after 1750, then the Ottomans are going to say, okay, we don't have any factories here. Let's pay for the stuff from Europe. And there's going to actually be a lot of debt that the Ottomans will get into because they're mostly going to kind of destroy their economies in a way because they are looking to buy manufactured products rather than industrialize themselves. Because industrialization is very costly, as we're going to see in Unit 5. But we see another factor is actually going to be a political factor. And that's going to be that even though the empire desperately needs to reform, especially after 1750, who's going to resist that? It's going to be very conservative, very traditional groups who don't want to change. Groups like the ulama, and you should know this vocab term, the ulama, the Islamic scholar class, they don't want to change their society because that goes against the teachings in the Quran. It goes against religious traditionalism. We also see the Janissaries. The Janissaries believe that if we modernize, then the Janissary class would kind of go away. So they're going to be resistant to modernization attempts. And we see an example of that actually with the Tulip period. The Tulip period is a brief rule in the Ottoman Empire when a guy named Ahmed III, he is going to try and modernize the Ottoman Empire. He's going to try and make the taxation system more efficient. And he's also going to kind of curb the political influence of both the ulama and the Janissaries. But how did the Janissaries and ulama respond? They're going to stage a revolt. They're going to actually assassinate the Ottoman Sultan, Ahmed III. And we do kind of see that very conservative forces are very resistant to change, desperately needed in the Ottoman Empire. There's a good TED Ed video about the rise of the Ottomans, and we'll look at the fall of the Ottomans much more later on. No, we're not watching it. So you should be able to identify factors that caused Ottoman decline. And if you like talking about the Ottomans, don't worry. We'll talk about them more in our other units. We'll talk about them, kind of their modernization attempts later on when we discuss the 1800s. And then we'll look at their fall when we talk about World War I. And we'll definitely see how Europe played a role in that, especially to carve up very oil-rich areas. All right. Have a great and blessed day. Bye. All right. Stop.